Welcome to the Mindcraft podcast. My name is Kimberly Quinn, and I have with me the wonderful Jim Stutz for episode 3 of the top 5 regrets of the dying, which Jim was inspired by the author of that book, Bronne Ware. And Jim is going to talk to us today about this topic. We've just been chatting kind of off the camera here because we're both so taken with it, which is I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. So, welcome back, Jim.
Thanks again for having me. I love being here.
Oh, I love having you here. So, Jim Stutz, my dear friend from our mastermind group, is just a literature lover. Let's say that. So am
Mhm.
I, and very passionate, a very passionate retired middle school teacher who is now has now started a business called Simplify, which I'll let him fill you in on that later if he so chooses. But for now, I'd like Jim to get us going on maybe chat about how you start off with the essay you sent me, if you'd
Mm,
like.
okay.
However you'd like to
So,
start, Jim, is fine.
okay. Well, when I look at the topic, this particular regret, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. There's a little blurb that is attached to it that goes a little more in depth about how the regret is people are sorry that they suppressed their feelings, but also their true desires to
Hmm.
pursue certain things in life in order to just sort of keep the peace with others, or maybe in their family or their cultures, because maybe it was considered not acceptable or it was criticized. And as a result, a lot of these people settle for what is called in this blurb mediocre existences and never become who they were truly capable of becoming, which is the real tragedy, if that's not overstating it.
I don't think so.
And many people end up developing illnesses later in life related to the bitterness and the resentment that they have over sort of letting these opportunities go without trying them. Um, and so that is, again, from the author of the book, Bronnie Ware. I mean, this is something that was a recurring theme in the conversation she had with her hospice patients. So it's clearly a very common experience for a lot of people, sadly. And again, the purpose of our conversation here about these regrets is to learn from them so that we can course correct if we are going down that particular path while we still have time to do something about it.
Still have time to autocorrect, right? It's
Yeah.
interesting, Jim, because already have written a couple things down in the first 35 seconds because it's so interesting.
Mm.
It's interesting, like when you're talking about the mental health stuff that was going on, the dialogue going within, and this snuff picture like a candle, those things that snuff the candle. So the authentic
Yes,
self getting snuffed out, and how that
absolutely.
how that yeah how that leads to the somatization. Like the becoming it becomes real, actual real disease in the body
Yes.
is amazing to me. Horrible,
Mm.
but amazing.
I think, yeah, and I think especially in Western society, we could probably chalk up a significant portion of
Mm-hmm.
people's illnesses to these similar kinds of issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yet we medicate them instead.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Rather than, as usual, get to the bottom of
The
what's
source, the
causing the
roots.
disease, you know, or
Yeah.
as Louise Hay always likes to call it,
Yes.
dis hyphen ease.
Please,
Um,
yeah, she's great. Yeah,
yeah, she's
Louise.
fantastic.
Oh gosh, I really loved her. Dis-ease. And also, as I'm sure you know too, it's often been said, if you want to know what's happening in the mind, ask the body.
Mm, mm, very powerful.
Yeah, I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of these dis-eases are coming from unresolved issues and snuffed out authentic selves. So maybe, and also you started out with a quote there, Jim, too, and about this whole idea of being true to ourselves is so essential, and it's going to leak out one way or the other. We kind of may as well full throttle embrace it, right?
Yeah, I that's the ideal thing. And that's to me that's our job, I think, those of us that are around, say, young people, whether we're parents, teachers, coaches, and young people could be anybody from, birth to 25 or 30 sometimes. But especially in their youth, when children start to exhibit interests in things or maybe even talents, I think it's our job to really pay attention to that and take note of it and to nurture those things in very healthy ways, which is another issue where we've gone off the rails in
Right,
our
right, right.
culture. But um, and if we were to do that, to encourage those things in healthy ways, to nurture them, that would be teaching young people to embrace those things that
Yeah.
sort of call to them. And they may change, from time to time as they're growing, our interests change. But yes, shifting the approach to let's embrace this rather than, oh, that's not acceptable. You'll never make a living at that. Or in our culture, we don't do that. We do this. Um,
Right.
so, yeah, if we could start to make little corrections or shifts in the way we help young people to embrace their own natural gifts and talents. But for those of us that are long out of childhood who maybe were not encouraged to do that, we can start to make some choices, different choices. They don't have to be radical shifts, but even if you had a passion for painting or art or something as a young person that you
Definitely.
were talked out of pursuing, you can still do that on some minor level as an adult and sort of re-engage that passion, whatever it is for you, art, baking, gardening. There's always time we can make to re-engage ourselves in the things that really do, make our hearts sing.
Totally, Jim. Oh, my mind just went to two different places. Not a surprise. But I was thinking of some of the people in our group who are newer, and
Hmm.
some of them are men in our age range, and a lot of them are women. I don't know if that's just if that's just sort of how it happened, but a lot of them are saying things like this. They're starting out the business at 50 or 60
Yeah.
after doing what, the air quotes are the shoulda, woulda, couldas, and checking all the
Yes.
boxes, and only now are they able to write the book, do the thing in their 50s. Louise Hay
Yeah.
didn't get
And
started till
thank
she was
God they're
60,
doing it.
and thank God they're
That's
doing
right.
it, you
Yeah,
know?
and that's what I was saying is, it is never too late. We don't have to become, if you want to try to write a book, I mean, you can do that. And if you want to self-publish it or try to go the traditional route, you can do that. The point is not that you become a best-selling author. The point is that you
No.
have a desire to write and that you have something to say, or you have a desire to paint, or you have a desire to teach. Whatever it is that has been calling to you, you can find smaller ways to do that to rekindle that fire inside of you.
Yes, and also to be in the flow zone, like the actual, because people use the word a lot, right? But I mean it in the actual, based on the work of his name is Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, who talked about, like when you are playing your guitar. I'm sure writing it's the same, but I picture, like when you're maybe in the garage with, you're talking about your friend with the song that I just listened to, and all of a sudden you thought you're playing for 10 minutes, and then now it's dark, or you lose
Right.
like you
Oh,
lose track
yes.
of. So that's how you know you're in the flow zone, right? You lose track of time. You become
Absolutely.
one with the guitar, one with the writing, and you just there's nowhere else you'd rather be, no one else you'd rather be. It's this
Hmm.
elevated state of joy. And sometimes, Jim, it saddens me when there are people, especially in our age range, who haven't experienced that. Like it's
Yeah.
like before you said tragedy, oh, is that like over you? I forget how you said it, but no, that's a good use of the word. It's tragic
Mhm.
because our life
Yeah.
minutes are our most valued commodity. You can't even put language on life minutes, right? I find it heartbreaking when someone has
I
not
do too.
experienced that. Like you and I have experienced, in both of us for writing, I think, you for
Hmm.
music, me for teaching.
Hmm.
Um, and the other thought is see if you can comment on this one because have you seen Billy Elliot, the show, the Broadway?
Yeah, it's been a little while, but I saw the movie a couple of years ago.
Because the flip side of this, which I think would be a good way to go, actually, is what happens when you're told all around you, like for him, it was you're a boy, you can't do ballet, you can't do tap dance, you can't, he ended up being obviously a star. But, is there a name for that thing you snuff out candles? Just a candle snuffer? I don't
I
know.
think it's called a snifter, or is that
Snifter,
a?
I don't know. It's the thing that,
No, sorry, I think a snifter is what you drink brandy out of. I'm sorry. I think it's
but
just called a snuffer. I think it
is
is
it a
called a
snuffer?
candle snuffer. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
that is, I feel like like don't ever let somebody snuff out your light. Never, 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 never. I don't care if they're your
Yeah.
parents. I don't care who they are. So that movie, because it starts out, it's very very sad when he's trying so hard to taking all this, and never mind the energy investment of hiding himself, hide and masking, literally.
Yeah.
He wanted to wear girl clothing, he wanted to dance, he wanted to do all these things, and he was told none of it's okay. So meanwhile, he's doing the thing on the outside and dying on the inside. And so
Yeah.
maybe you can take us. I know you also shared an example down lower. That's up to you if you want to share that or not. But maybe walk us through, Jim, because it is tragic. This is not light stuff. We're talking about your spirit here, really, right? So what happens
Absolutely.
when we are in spirit? I think you even used jail in that. You found the keys on the wall to the prison, to the jail. What
Yeah.
happens when
Yeah.
we allow ourselves? And for children, that's said. You for an adult that would be more allowed, but for a child, you're dependent on the people who are jailing you, right? If
Yeah.
it's your parents. And so, what? Tell me what happens to that little boy or girl.
Well, from my own experience, as I shared in the essay that you just referred to, I'm naturally inclined to be quite introverted. Um, as a young boy, I was pretty quiet, kept to myself. My world was very internal. Lots of ideas. I loved, reading and writing and
Hmm.
drawing and creative things like that. And I had a pretty active imagination. And even then, like, I wasn't big on just chit chat with people. If it was actually a topic of interest that somebody had something to say about or wanted to engage in conversation, that was fantastic. But if it was just, let's talk about the weather, I really didn't have any interest. Um, but because I had those very typical introvert characteristics pretty strongly as a young boy, and because introverts are not in the majority,
Hmm.
most of the people around me, including adults, family members, teachers, parents, they just didn't know what to make of it, and I think they were uncomfortable with somebody who was sort of self-contained like that. And
Hmm.
so I would often be on the receiving end of critical comments like, well, how come you don't have anything to say? How come you're so quiet? Why don't you come and join the rest of us? Why don't you be this? Why don't you be more that? Why are you doing it that way? And as a young person, like every time you hear that, it's like having an arrow shot into you, and
Right, right, right,
right through
right,
your
right,
heart saying, and it's just one message after the other of there's something wrong with you.
right.
And so even though you have no other way of being, but you're clearly receiving the message that whoever you are, the way you are, is not okay. And so you just learn to suppress and stuff it down and adapt your behavior to try to please other people. And after a while, that pretending becomes normal, and you don't even realize it anymore that you're pretending,
Right.
that you've completely lost touch with your own authentic self. Because those other parts of me that were being so criticized, like I was always fine with them. I never thought, God, I wish I weren't this way.
Right, right,
I
right.
was totally happy to be that way. It was just the other people around me constantly bombarding me with these critical comments. And so I lost who I was for decades. And it wasn't until I was in my mid 40s, I had, had this period where like everything fell apart, and it was okay, time to take a serious look at how I got here and where I want to go from here. And through reading things like Louise Hay's books and Wayne Dyer and people of that
Love him, love
nature,
them. Hmm.
yeah, um, through that kind of the messages in their books, I realized all this time there wasn't a thing wrong with me.
Right.
And I liked who I was. I liked that kid. And because those books were encouraging, those lessons were encouraging, I could consciously choose, again, later in life as an adult, I could choose to truly embrace those qualities in myself that other people found objectionable as a kid, but that I loved about myself. And I just stopped apologizing for it and just embraced it. Like, if you're uncomfortable because I'm quiet, that's your problem, not mine. Um, you know? And it started from there, but it was like getting to the point, first of all, things fell apart to the point where I was like, okay, this, obviously something hasn't worked. Um, and luckily I had the point of view that I could make some different choices, and encouraged by people like Louise Hay and other teachers of that nature. And I could revisit that kid that had been told there was something wrong with him and realize he was perfectly fine all along.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that, Jim, because it's a huge
Yeah.
courage there. And I know you're not alone in that. This is could possibly even be one of the most relatable, episodes ever, because what we've tapped into, Jim, is shame. And
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
some that's what we're talking about. Some people get that confused, right? Guilt says I made a mistake. Shame says I am the mistake, right? It's that I'm
Yeah.
defective, flawed, broken, damaged goods. And in my own opinion, there is not a more toxic emotion a human being can, experience than that. And
Yeah.
it takes a lot of years to come back from that, especially, and it usually happens when we're kids, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the message of your inherent being is not okay is really tough and takes tremendous courage to heal from. So the fact you're able to share that, I don't doubt is going to touch lots and lots and lots of people.
Thank you. I hope so.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, and sometimes it takes something huge, a life thing,
Yeah.
which it would be a tough sell in the moment that this is really for
Yeah.
you. Like the bless and the mess, it'd be a tough sell. Like somebody
Yes.
loses the house, the partner, whatever it is that happens, or a health thing. But when you look
Right.
back, you're like, wow, 10 more years could have gone by where I would have
Mm.
been, numbed out
Yeah.
from this wonderful, wonderful, brilliant human being who I am. That would have been far worse than said life thing.
Yeah, and I think what you just said really, really strikes on the whole topic of I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings
Mm-hmm.
because, I look back on certain people I've known. It's always easier to see examples outside of ourselves
Right.
who were living what you just described. Like from the outside, you could see, oh my gosh, this person is deserves so much better than the life they're accepting.
Right.
Whether it's the way their partner, wife, husband treats
Treats
them,
them. Yeah.
the career that they've just sort of like fallen into and stayed there for comfort
Right.
or whatever. Um, and that is what this topic is about is what if you had the courage to say, I've had it with that. I'm done with that.
Done with that.
It's not fulfilling my spirit. And it doesn't necessarily mean you have to quit the relationship, but you can start to say, look, things need to change. Maybe that will work at a job as well, or maybe you do need to change a career. Um, but better late than never. I mean, I
100%.
was, like I said, mid 40s to late 40s when I started making some of these changes. And, the way I thought about it was better, however many years I have left in my life,
Absolutely.
making newer choices than to stick with the ones I've been suffering with.
And to play it safe. And that's I use the word courage several times, which I meant sincerely because you know it it's kind of sad that it takes so much courage. Because babies, like
Yeah.
you're making babies don't know anything else but to be themselves. Who else am I going to be?
Right.
Like as they say,
And they're
everybody else is
thrilled about
already
who they are, right?
right. Everybody else is already taken. That's what they say. Babies just
That's right.
naturally, they just know they're loved. They know they're invited. They know that that people want to hold them and love them and kiss them and everything else. And then something happens where we spend the rest of our 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and beyond trying to get that feeling back.
Yeah.
And it takes
Yeah.
so much courage. And
And
then
these
you
things,
kind of, yeah, I wanted to hear what you have to say about this, Jim, because you talked a little bit about what would maybe be considered codependent behaviors, because when we're pulled out of
mm,
our frames, like we're born in our little baby frames, and inside the frame, when I do this talk, I have a frame with me. But so like
mm,
the babies know that inside it's my authentic self, love, unconditional love. Well, that's sort of redundant. Love is unconditional anyway. So love, being cherished, welcomed, invited, all the things. When we get pulled out of that by these shameful messages, we start to look out here for the external everything
mhm.
to put
Yeah.
back what's in the frame we were born into, right? So
Yep.
maybe you can explain to the listeners some of the things that we do when we've been pulled away from our authentic selves, out of our authentic frames by shameful, toxic messages. What do we do to exist and survive?
There's a lot of things that we do. You know, I, th- from a young age, I mean, it could affect the friends we choose to hang out with,
Mm-hmm.
um, because we're seeking approval and because we've somehow, at a pretty early age, many of us have received the message that we're, as you said, we're broken, we're defective, something inside of you inherently is not acceptable.
Right.
And so the answer certainly cannot lie within myself. So I must look outside of myself to fix this problem. And so relationships, whether it's the friends we choose that we think hanging out with these particular kinds of people are going to somehow fill that hole. Um, and sometimes they're good friends, and sometimes they're not the right crowd, but they have a certain cachet that we're attracted to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Um, it can affect our behavior as students, you know. Either we're going, like in my case, I was very people pleasing, and so I was always like got good marks for behavior from my teachers. I was always really well liked by my teachers. I worked really hard in school to get good grades. Um, you know, Part of that was some natural desire for learning, but a lot of it, I think, was, desperately wanting approval.
Oh, yeah.
But other people might take it to the other. Like as a teacher, you've seen, I'm sure, and I've seen other kids, it goes the other way. It's like, well, I'm going to pretend like I don't care. I'm not going to cooperate. I'm not going to do my work. I'm not going to behave well.
Mm-hmm.
And they still get attention for that. It's just the attention they want.
Right.
And those things just continue to sort of develop as we grow and get older. It becomes from our friends we choose to the spouses we choose or the partners we choose. Again, looking for someone else outside of ourselves to fill the brokenness inside of us. And again, maybe we'll have somebody who's genuinely a kind partner, and sometimes we pick someone who's more not so kind, maybe even abusive.
Mm-hmm.
But we that's what we believe we deserve.
Right.
Um,
You hit it right on the nose right there.
yeah, and the and even if it's a good, a nice person that we choose, we realize now, like, how unfair is that to put that burden on another person?
Right.
I'm choosing you as my partner because now it's your job to fix me.
Right.
Um, when we know that that's not possible. Um, we end up choosing jobs that, again, is what we think we deserve rather than the things that we truly might
Mm-hmm.
have
Mm-hmm.
done if we were encouraged to follow our hearts and our passions. So we end up in jobs that we're miserable at, even if we're successful at them. If they're not the thing that we are really made to do, we're not going to be happy. And so we just keep paying the price,
Right.
in all of these areas. And if we have children, it's going to impact the kind of parent we are. One of my favorite quotes about that is from Carl Jung, and it's something to the effect of, nothing makes a bigger impact on a child than the unlived life of the parent. So a parent who is
Wow.
unfulfilled and is frustrated and angry or bitter or whatever it is because of the life they've let slip by,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
they're going to take that out on their kids somehow. And, again, how unfair is that? Um, and so, it's kind of a long answer to your question, but it just snowballs into all the major areas of our lives when we're
Right.
filled with shame about who we truly are, which we realize later, hopefully, at some point, but some of us don't, that we don't deserve that shame. We didn't do anything to deserve that or to bring it on ourselves, but it's been instilled in us. And we go about our lives believing that we're just not worthy of being loved and loving ourselves.
It was really very eloquently said, Jim, because the whole thing, I mean, think about it. We talk a lot about it in the group, actually, is related to business, but even with self value, that feeling of original worthiness, our little baby
Yeah.
selves we're born into the world with, just that knowing that we're loved,
Mhm.
knowing that we're cherished, knowing that we're invited in the room, to all of it, is essential for all the rest. Like to have a healthy marriage, or let's say long-term relationship, to have a really a job that's a good fit, just to have the interview go well, is about self-value. All of
Yeah.
it comes down to the worthiness thing. So without, it doesn't mean that we don't struggle with it sometimes, but to really have that rock solid knowing that you are worthy and worthy of love and worthy of all of it, without that, not much is going to fall into place well.
No. And, hopefully we come across somebody who tells us these things at some
Hmm.
point. But then, I mean, it still has to get through our own belief system about
That's the
that,
hard, that's the challenge, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah.
I
Because
know,
again, it's
yeah.
can only those things can only be repaired from within. So
Oh,
it's
100%.
a good start. It's a great start to receive those messages of love from
Hmm.
another person or a great book. People who are there to teach us that, remind us this. And sometimes it's not even reminding because we've never really been taught it in the first place.
Right,
But that's, a great start. But then we have to believe it,
right, 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 right,
and
right. And
that is tough.
it is hard. The good news, though, because we, Jim and I are living proof, because he and I experienced a whole lot of shame growing up. I had a very addicted situation I grew up in. Very difficult to separate addiction from shame. So all these feelings of being defective. But the good news for the listeners is the first step. I think you'll agree, Jim. You can certainly say if you don't. The first step is awareness, because we can't do what we don't know. If we just
Yeah.
continue like zombies, like children of the corn, in this mode of being everybody's everything all the time, and all the falsity around the not really wanting this job or this partner or this life or whatever, and just doing this, we can continue to do that. But once we become aware, though, that's you do like this to yourself, because now you're on your way, because you don't ever become unaware again. Like once the switch is flipped
Yeah.
on, you're off and running, and you're in for a trip. But I see
Yeah.
see what your comments are, Jim. I'm interested.
Yeah. No, I think you're right on about that. I think it's true, what they say that, we all do the best we can with the knowledge we have.
Right,
But then there is this thing called awareness that you talked about, or some people say waking up.
right,
And yeah, once that occurs, we might not know where to go from there, but nothing's going to be the same again. Like we know enough that we just can't go back or continue
right.
with the way things have been. And that's all it takes. I mean, I think one of Louise Hay's books, she talks about all it takes is your willingness for things to change. You don't have to know anything else, how it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, who's going to help you. But it's just having that awareness, that waking up, and the willingness to start to make some changes. And Martha Beck is another one of my favorite
Hmm.
authors in
Hmm.
this arena. And her last book was called The Way of Integrity. And she talks about getting to this point in your life and just making she calls it 1 degree changes, like in a 360-degree circle. We don't have to go 180 overnight. That's a shock to the system, and it's not going
Right,
to
I
last
agree.
if we do try to do something that radical. But she just talks about making these little 1 degree turns, just one at a time, being gentle with ourselves. And even that is, as you said, it's going to be maybe turbulent and rough at times. People who have known us a certain way and expect us to continue to being that way aren't going to like it sometimes. But if we've reached that point where we've just had enough, then that's just going to be what it's going to be. And we're able to be okay with that.
Hmm.
We finally reach a point where we value ourselves enough
There you
to
go.
stop worrying so much and living for everyone else.
I just want to say amen, brother, because it's really, really, really true. Yeah, I just, because I actually listened to a talk about a month ago, and he's super well known, so I won't say his name. Really, really well known. But he talked about how he was living his life doing this particular sport for so long, and it was safe for him and all these things. And then he said, I realized, I woke up, and he ended up having a series of things happen, addictions and all different things. He woke up and he said, I realized that everybody loved my life except me.
Hmm. Hmm.
And there were all these positive kudos, because here he is, really famous, really good athlete,
Yeah.
and getting good money, all of it, all the things.
Yep.
And except he was miserable inside and dying inside. And it took a ton of courage for this person to finally whoa, family, friends, world, I'm jumping off the train,
Yeah.
you know, really,
Good
really
for
wild,
him.
because to feed that falsity is so toxic.
Yeah. Yeah, and it must be doubly tough when you're somebody like that who's praised for being this way that is
Hmm.
no longer serving you. And you're making a ton of money at it, and everybody loves you and adores you.
And it
And
looks like you
who's going
have
to
it all.
understand that? Yeah, and who's going to understand it when that person goes, no, this isn't working for me, I'm leaving.
It's not working for
Um,
me. It's not working for me.
yeah,
Didn't, he hated his life.
yeah,
There's a whole lot more to the story, obviously, but it just was too fast, too much. Like the
yep,
speed of forward, just too much. And
yeah,
wow, is really super powerful. And I think a lot of us, even tougher if you're in the limelight. I think
yes.
for us
Oh, yeah,
regular people, it's hard enough
oh, yeah.
without being under, people being able to know everything you're doing. But
Right.
wow, I just think there is, like you said, there's, like you just said it earlier, when you look like, okay, my new path, my awareness path, it might be take a lot of courage and be challenging, but and anything worse than what's behind me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I remember, uh, when I was going through my divorce, and I was talking to a therapist helping me through that, and I said something in one of our sessions about, I think I've come to the decision that it's better to be by myself
Hmm.
than to be in a marriage or a relationship that is like really toxic. And he was just like, yeah, absolutely, of course. But when you're in it, you
Tough
don't
sell.
necessarily see it
Right,
that way.
right. Well,
But the
yeah, when
same
you're,
goes with the guy.
yes, yes, and I'm sure whether it's a divorce or you can't, it's very difficult for us to see it when we're in it. Even if
Yeah,
the people around us who love us are saying
yeah,
things and stuff, we just can't see it. I think because, society does a lot to us about, we've got the boxes we need to check, and all the have tos, and you must,
yeah.
honor their
I
mother and
think,
father even if they're abusive. No, I don't think so.
yeah.
To me, it took me a
And there's
lot of
also,
years. Go ahead.
well, I think there's also a huge stigma in our culture about quitting something, no
Yes.
matter how horrible it is. It's like, oh, you're a quitter, like, well,
Yep.
yeah, I was dying. I mean, why would I stay? But that is so anathema in our culture, like to walk away from something that is literally killing you.
And even tough to quit, like with the person I told you, to quit something that you're getting all kinds of positive for. I mean, if
Hmm.
somebody's doing meth, well, good idea to quit. You get a lot of, or let's say saying something that's a little more socially acceptable, drinking, and you can
Yeah.
tell. Then it's people are supportive of you for maybe not always, but if you're doing
Yeah.
something like you're in a marriage, that's a huge box to check. Still, right? This
Hmm.
is the thing, and
Yep.
then, or if a couple chooses not to have kids, what? you know,
Yeah.
because
Right.
that's what you do. You get married, you get the house, you have the kids, you go on a
Hmm.
few, you go to Disney World, and then you retire. I mean, that's how it works. You mow the lawn in between,
Right.
right? But if
Yeah.
you don't want to, if you don't want to check those boxes, like what do you mean you don't want to get married? What do you mean you are married but you want to have kids?
Yep.
The whole thing. And I think it takes tremendous courage to bust out of society jail like
It,
that.
yeah, it does because, I mean, like you said, there's so much societal pressure, and I think, I know for me, like before I got married, of course, constantly bombarded with a question from family, especially, when you're going to get married, when you're going to get married. And I look around at all the people that are asking this, and I don't know how typical this is for other people, but in my experience, I was being asked this question by loads of people who couldn't stand their own marriages.
Oh,
I'm like,
wow.
why you want me to sign up for that club? You know, like you just want me to join you in your misery? I mean,
Why do you want me to sign up for that club? That's amazing. That's that's a good question. I mean, obviously there are a lot of good marriages out there too. But you think of last I checked, which isn't current at all. It's a long time ago. It was like 2/3 in the United States that divorces and stuff. I don't know, but like the
is
whole
it up to
point is
two-thirds?
living.
That doesn't surprise me.
That was also not. That's not recent. That was years ago. It's
Oh,
probably changed with the millennials waiting and all that stuff. But
oh, yeah, that's
but but
true.
the but the point is to just like to thine own self be true, like you were saying before. What's if being married is good for you? Great. Being in
Yep.
that being a teacher is good for you? Great. Going to Disney World is good for you? All the things, right? But if it's not, Billy Elliot wanted to be a dancer.
Yep.
You got to do you, because eventually
Yeah.
the choices are really you got to do you or you die inside. Those are really the two choices.
That's a great way to put it. Just right to the point. Yeah.
There really is no middle. Like you can be sort of
No.
smoldering, but that's on the way to dying.
Mm-hmm.
There's like doing you and living the life or misery.
Yeah.
I guess in the middle maybe
And
there's a numbed out falsity, maybe, but
perhaps. But what you're saying is making me think of numerous people I've heard, for some reason, especially comedians, when people ask people who are now successful comedians, they've maybe had their own TV shows and they're very
right,
well
right.
known, very successful, and they ask them, like, what was the happiest you ever were? And I've heard so many of them say, when I was living in my car as a 20-year-old kid, when I decided this is what I was going to do,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
and
yeah.
I moved from wherever I lived to LA or New York or wherever the local comedy scene was, and that was my life. That was every moment of my life was dedicated to following this thing that I was just calling to me, and I couldn't do anything other than that, and I didn't care that I was living in a car or on my friend's couch or whatever. And, not everybody, of course, that does that is going to go on to have the kind of success many of them do. But I mean, the fact that these people who are now, multimillionaires and making a comfortable living doing what they're doing, the happiest time in their life was when they were homeless and,
And couch
picking up
surfing,
2
yeah,
a.m. slots at a nightclub. What does that tell you? I mean, not that we all have to go to that extreme, but I mean, whatever it is that's pulling you,
yeah.
follow it.
Yeah, and my good friend Oprah has a really good saying. She says you want to listen to those whispers before they turn into bricks.
Yep.
Because
I've heard her say.
that can be the other way where it's messages of health, like smaller health things you ignore, ignore,
Yeah.
ignore, and then have a heart attack. Or it's what you and I are talking about with whispers pulling you to do comedy, whispers pulling you, to do said awesome thing, and then you end
Yeah.
up being in corporate America. No offense to corporate America, but if that's not for you, and you're still dying, and then the bricks happen.
Yeah, I
You
heard
gotta
her
listen
say
to the
that
inner
once.
voice.
Yeah, I heard her say that, and I think it was after I had been through my divorce, and it just totally made sense because that was what had happened with me in my relationships. Like, every relationship I was ever in was just a variation on the one before, except each time a little bit more painful until the marriage I was in, which was incredibly, like, it was beyond measure in terms of the pain. But I didn't hear the whispers the first time, and I
Right.
didn't hear the slightly louder whisper the second time, and I didn't hear the normal tone of voice the third
Like the
time.
bullhorn, right, right, right.
Exactly. And like the fifth time was like literally almost killed me. And I was like, oh, okay, I hear it now.
Right.
But it was that exact thing that she said. Like, I wasn't hearing the whispers. And it took a ton of bricks to fall on me before I finally got the lesson.
Right. Jim, I don't know if this makes you feel better or not, good or not, but my best friend from growing up and I, we often say to each other, we're like neon signs in Vegas with the whispers. I don't see them or hear them either, and they're like bing, 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 and it takes our sledgehammer, and it takes a
Yeah.
while for me as well. It takes a while because I think when we're so focused on whether it's a loyalty issue that maybe isn't deserved, because that's a big pull for me. I'm a really loyal person, and it can be it can adhere to things where, or it can be other reasons, but we are like sticking like super glue to said situation that's not good for us, and it can just, for me, it takes neon signs in Vegas sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's we mentioned earlier before we started talking about the wisdom that ancient cultures had about being in tune with
Right.
the universe and the earth and themselves, and we have in our modern culture have completely disconnected from that, where we're not encouraged to even acknowledge that those things are there, because they are. I mean, there are systems in place in our biology that are meant to communicate things to us about this kind of thing, our intuition or our gut or our heart. I mean, they serve more than just biological functions. They actually are communicative devices.
Oh, no question.
And yet we, in our culture, we're not accustomed anymore to paying any attention to them or hearing them. That's what I love that. I think it was the Quakers that are have the phrase about the still small voice of God inside
Yeah,
of
yeah,
you,
yeah.
or just the still small voice. And I'm a huge believer in that. But in order to hear a still small voice, we have to be still and quiet enough to hear it. And it is filled with wisdom, but it will not shout. So we have to get quiet enough to let it come through and listen to it.
Oh, 100%. Rather than filling our lives every day with so much busyness, flying around like gerbils on crack, really.
Yeah.
If we're in that mode of, which in and of itself can be an addiction, right? We're in that mode of, if we're not productive, we don't have to be productive every second. We can go out to the woods. We can go in a quiet room and a place that I 100% agree with you, because the little inner voice isn't going to get a bullhorn.
No,
It's a
no.
quiet inner voice.
Yeah. And again, I think that's by design,
Hmm.
it's, which again, I think ancient peoples knew this, they
Hmm.
made time in I mean, they didn't even necessarily make time, it was just the way they lived. I know the Native Americans, the more I read about them, uh, being silent for long stretches was just part
Hmm.
of how they lived. It was like
Right.
valued.
Hmm.
Even when they were in conversation, there would be long periods of silence while the person whose turn it was to speak was formulating their thoughts carefully before they just spewed whatever. And so a conversation even had long stretches of silence. And silence is powerful, you know, and there's a lot in silence if we let ourselves experience it.
Oh, 100%. I agree with you. In fact, I'll just tell you quickly, because this is probably a really good place to organically wrap it up. I had a good, or we had a good friend who went into the priesthood. He's not anymore, but he right out of
Hmm.
college, and they did a 3-day silent retreat where the
Hmm.
novitiates, I think that was the word it was, for the priest to be.
Hmm.
Literally, they wore a little thing. Don't I forget, maybe it's, I don't know what it said, but quiet something. And
Yeah.
he didn't talk for 3 whole days. When he came back from that, we were barely out of college. He was like 23. And I said, how was it? And he said it was so powerful. He said, I can't even put words to it. You can't, because it was just, you're forced to go in, which is what they wanted.
Yeah.
You know, for 3 days is a long time to not speak.
Mm-hmm. And that, like you said, that sort of does bring us full circle to, you know, why those people that are having that regret about not having the courage to express their feelings or pursue their heart's dreams, that is, I think, that's how we get back in touch with it.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to be 3 days of silence, but it does need to be some sort of silence, meditation, even if it's, you know, walking, taking a walk somewhere, preferably, you know, somewhere that's like a foresty area or a beach or something, or the desert is profound in terms of its silence. I mean, there are desertscapes, at least out here in California, where you can almost, it sounds weird, but you can almost hear the silence. It's so just thick around you. And that's where you can, if you've lost who you are,
Mm-hmm.
it's in that silence, even if it's in your home and you just turn everything off and you just sit for a while and let the chatter process, because it will. That's when the still small voice will eventually emerge and say, this is where you're supposed to be going. Remember that?
Right.
Do you remember that you enjoyed that? Do you remember how much you love that? But it won't be heard unless we do come back to that silence.
I love that. I love that. This is a fantastic place to, I think, organically wrap it up, because coming back to that place of silence, right? Because we win from within. So I'd like to thank you all for listening. I'd like to thank the wonderful Jim Stutz for being with us for episode 3, which was, I wish I had the courage to express my feelings. And we hope to see you all also for episode 4, which will be coming up in a couple weeks. And you can also, if you'd like to reach out to Jim, you can find his information below. So thank you very much for being with us, Jim.
Thanks for having me. It's always a privilege.